Dust choked the air inside the distinct hum of the Black Hawk helicopter, the smell of copper blood and burning diesel overwhelming the senses. 18 men were bleeding out on the floor of a besieged forward operating base, and the only surgeon was dead. Everyone looked at the trembling orderly in the corner, expecting panic. They didn't know that the woman adjusting her gloves wasn't just a nurse. She was a ghost from a classified special operations unit who had forgotten more about combat trauma than most generals ever knew. When the mortar rounds started falling, she didn't run. She locked the doors and went to work. This is the true story of how one woman held back death itself. Forward Operating Base, FOB. Iron Horse sat like a blister on the scorched earth of the Kunar Valley. It was a dusty, forgotten outpost where the heat made the air ripple and the silence was heavier than the gunfire. For the men of Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, the war had become a monotonous cycle of patrols, heat exhaustion, and waiting for the inevitable crack of a sniper rifle from the ridges. Inside the medical tent, things were usually quiet. Too quiet for Lieutenant Silas Kincaid. Silas was new to the valley, a jaw-squared officer fresh from Fort Benning, who believed in chain of command and polished boots. He didn't know what to make of the base's civilian nurse, Madeline Harper. Madeline was 34, plain-faced, and moved with a silence that bordered on unnerving. She spent her days organizing gauze checking inventory lists 3 times over and reading paperback novels in the corner of the TOC Tactical Operations Center. To the soldiers, she was just Mads, the nice lady who handed out ibuprofen and foot powder. She never raised her voice. She never joined in the raucous poker games. When the boys bragged about firefights, she would quietly excuse herself. "She's soft," Silas muttered one evening, watching Madeline carefully fold a blanket with surgical precision. He was sitting with Sergeant Kowalski, a bear of a man, with a dip of tobacco permanently wedged in his lip. "I don't get why Command sent a civilian out here. If shit hits the fan, she's going to be a liability." Kowalski shrugged, spitting into an empty water bottle. "She's harmless, LT. Keeps the inventory straight. Dr. Sterling likes her." Dr. Sterling was the base surgeon, a cynical man in his 50s who had seen too much and cared too little about military protocol. He treated Madeline like a glorified secretary, often snapping his fingers for files or coffee. Madeline never complained. She just delivered what was asked. Her eyes lowered her face an unreadable mask. But there were details about Madeline that didn't fit small things that only a paranoid mind would notice. One Tuesday, Private First Class Jinx Jenkins came in with a deep laceration on his forearm from a jagged piece of rusted metal on a Humvee. He was panicking, blood spurting onto the canvas floor. Dr. Sterling was in the latrine. Silas happened to be in the tent looking for Sterling. He watched as Madeline approached the panicked private. "It's okay, Jinx," she said. Her voice didn't change pitch. It wasn't the soothing coo of a mother. It was a flat, cold command disguised as comfort. "Look at me." She didn't run for the doctor. She didn't scream for help. She simply reached out her fingers, finding the pressure point on his brachial artery with a speed that blurred in the air. The bleeding stopped instantly. With her other hand, she grabbed a hemostat from the tray without looking, clamped the vessel, and began irrigation. When Sterling finally burst in, breathless and disheveled, the wound was already cleaned and prepped. "Good catch, Harper." Sterling grunted, pushing past her to take the glory of the stitches. Madeline stepped back into the shadows, wiping her hands on her scrubs. Silas caught her eye for a second. There was no fear in them. There was nothing. Just a flat, predatory calmness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Where did you learn to hit an artery like that?" Silas asked her later, cornering her by the water buffalo tank outside. Madeline looked up, shielding her eyes from the harsh sun. Nursing school lieutenant, Anatomy 101. That didn't look like Anatomy 101, Silas pressed. That looked like muscle memory. I'm a quick learner, she said softly, picking up her crate of supplies. Is there anything else, Lieutenant? Or can I get back to my inventory? Silas watched her walk away. Her stride was peculiar. She rolled her feet, making no sound on the gravel, her center of gravity low. It wasn't the walk of a hospital nurse. It was the walk of someone who was used to moving through hostile territory without being seen. He went back to the comms tent and pulled her file. It was disappointingly thin. Madeline Harper, registered nurse, previous employment General Hospital, Ohio, no prior military service. It was clean, too clean. It looked like a file created yesterday. You're paranoid, Kincaid, Silas told himself. She's just a nurse. He was wrong. He was dead wrong. And 3 days later, the valley would prove it. The mission was supposed to be a standard presence patrol, a hearts and minds run to a village called Shokran, 6 clicks north of the Forbé. Intel suggested a local warlord was moving weapons through the bazaar, but the threat level was deemed moderate. Silas led the convoy. He took 3 MRAPs and 18 men, including Sergeant Kowalski Jinks and a medic named Corporal Higgins. Dr. Sterling stayed back at the base with Madeline. The morning started calm. The radio chatter was routine. The heat was already baking the armor of the vehicles by 0800. Keep your eyes on the rooftops, Silas ordered, over the comms. I don't like how empty the streets are. Copy that, LT, Kowalski replied. Feels like a ghost town. They rolled through the narrow streets of Shokran without incident. But as they turned back toward the main supply route, MSR designated Route Copper. The world exploded. It wasn't just an IED, it was a daisy chain. Boom, boom, boom. 3 massive detonations ripped through the asphalt, flipping the lead vehicle into the air like a toy. The concussion wave shattered the windows of the second MRAP, where Silas was sitting. Dust and black smoke instantly swallowed the convoy. Contact right, Kowalski screamed over the radio. Machine gun fire erupted from the tree line and the ridges above. It was a complex ambush. They were in the kill zone. Dismount, and return fire, Silas yelled, kicking his door open. He stumbled out into the chaos, his ears ringing. The scene was a nightmare. The lead vehicle was a burning wreck. Men were crawling out, screaming. The rear vehicle had taken a direct hit to the engine block and was immobilized. They were pinned down in a wadi, taking heavy fire from 3 sides. Status report, Silas roared, firing his carbine blindly into the ridge. Higgins is down, someone screamed. The medic is down. He took one in the neck. Silas felt his stomach drop. Higgins was their only medic on the patrol. Get him cover to get everyone onto the defilade. For 40 minutes they fought. They called for air support, but the weather had turned. A sudden dust storm was grounding the birds. They were on their own. We have to move, Kowalski shouted, dragging a wounded soldier behind a rock. We're sitting ducks here. LT. Load the wounded into the functional MRAP, Silas ordered. We're punching through back to base, go-go. It was a miracle they made it out. With tires shredded and armor pockmarked by RPGs, the surviving vehicle and the limping second truck roared back toward Iron Horse. Inside the vehicles, it was a slaughterhouse. 18 men, every single one of them wounded. 6 were critical. Higgins, the medic, was unconscious and bleeding out. Jinks had shrapnel in his chest. Kowalski had a crushed leg. Silas grabbed the radio handset, his hands slick with blood. Base, this is Bravo Actual. We are coming in hot mass casualty event. Repeat, Mascal. We have 18 wounded, multiple critical. Get Sterling ready. The radio crackled. The voice on the other end wasn't the calm comms officer. It was a panicked private. Sir, you can't come in the north gate. Why the hell not? Mortars! The base is under attack too. A secondary force hit us while you were out. Dr. Sterling is dead, sir. The silence in the vehicle was louder than the engine. Say again, Silas whispered. A mortar round hit the TOC. Sterling is KIA. The PA is down. We have no medical staff. Repeat, we have no medical staff. Silas looked around the interior of the MRAP. Men were groaning, clutching severed limbs, and gaping chest wounds. They were dying. Without a surgeon, without a medic, they were dead men rolling. Who is left? Silas demanded. Who is in the medical tent? Just the nurse, sir, the private stammered. Just Harper. Silas slammed his fist against the dashboard. A librarian nurse. We need a trauma surgeon. We need a miracle. She's all we got, LT. Kowalski gritted out his face, pale. Silas keyed the mic again. Tell Harper to prep everything she has. Tell her to pray. We'll be there in 2 minutes. He dropped the mic and looked at his men. They looked back at him with hollow eyes. They knew what it meant. A civilian nurse with no combat experience was about to be handed 18 broken bodies. Hang on, Silas told them, though he didn't believe it himself. Just hang on. Back at FOB Iron Horse, the sirens were wailing. Dust coated everything. The medical tent was shaking from the nearby blasts of incoming mortars. Madeline Harper stood in the center of the tent. She had heard the radio call. She knew Sterling was dead. She saw his body being pulled from the rubble of the TOC just minutes ago. She looked at her hands. They were trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump she hadn't felt in 5 years. She closed her eyes for a brief second. In the darkness of her mind, she wasn't Madeline Harper, the quiet nurse from Ohio. She was Captain Wraith Maddox, formerly of the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC 24th Special Tactics Squadron. She had been discharged honorably, but quietly after a mission in Yemen went dark. She had sworn never to touch a weapon again. She had sworn to live a life of peace. But war doesn't care about promises. She opened her eyes. The trembling stopped. The flat, cold look returned. She didn't run around screaming. She walked to her locker. She reached to the back behind the spare scrubs and pulled out a small black pouch she wasn't supposed to have. Inside were her own shears, a specialized tourniquet, and a set of combat stimulants. She put them in her pocket. Then she turned to the 2 terrified orderlies, Private Miller and Private Davila, who were cowering under a table. "Get up," she said. Her voice cut through the noise of the explosions like a razor blade. They looked at her confused. This wasn't the soft-spoken lady who organized the cotton balls. "I said get up," she barked the command, echoing with the authority of a field commander. Davila grabbed the crash carts. Miller, get every bag of O-negative blood we have and stage them by the door. Now. But Dr. Sterling is dead, Miller cried. We don't know what to do. Madeline walked over, grabbed Miller by the vest, and hauled him to his feet with one hand. She looked him dead in the eye. I am the doctor now, she said, and nobody dies in my tent today. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. Good. Prep for triage. The devil is coming to dinner, and we're going to feed him lead if we have to. Outside, the roar of the MREPs grew louder. The gates swung open. The vehicles screeched to a halt, smoke pouring from their engines. The back doors flew open. Blood spilled out onto the dust. Silas jumped out carrying Jinx. I need help here. He can't breathe. Madeline Harper stepped out of the tent. She wasn't wearing her usual white coat. She had stripped down to her olive-drab undershirt. She had tied her hair back tight. And for the first time, Silas saw the scar on her neck that she usually hid with a collar. A jagged line that spoke of a knife fight, not a surgery. She didn't flinch at the gore. She walked straight into the carnage. "Miller Davila, take the walking wounded to the mess hall," she ordered, pointing with absolute precision. "Lieutenant, bring that man to bed one. You," she pointed at another soldier. "Apply pressure there. Move." Silas stared at her for a split second. The soft civilian was gone. In her place was something else entirely. Something dangerous. "You heard her," Silas yelled at his men. "Move!" The battle for the 18 lives had begun. But the enemy wasn't just the Taliban fighters closing in on the perimeter. It was time. And Madeline Harper was about to go to war with the clock. The medical tent had ceased to be a place of healing. It had become an abattoir. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the stench of bowel contents from gut shots, and the acrid smoke drifting in from the burning TOC. The generator sputtered outside, casting the interior into flickering epileptic shadows that made the gore look even darker. Madeline Harper moved through the chaos like a conductor in a hurricane. Her white scrubs were gone, replaced by a blood-soaked apron over her olive tee. She wasn't running led to mistakes. She was gliding her efficiency terrifying in its absolute lack of hesitation. "Davila, keep pressure on Kowalski's femoral," she barked, not looking up from the soldier she was currently treating. "If he bleeds through that gauze, you put your knee in it. Do not let him die." "Yes, ma'am," the terrified private screamed back, putting his entire body weight onto the sergeant's shredded leg. On the main table lay Private Jinx. His chest was a ruin. A piece of shrapnel the size of a fist had punched through his ribs, collapsing his left lung and nicking the pericardium. He was drowning in his own blood, his face turning a terrifying shade of cyan. Silas stood on the other side of the table, his hands shaking as he held the retractors. He had seen combat. He had seen death. But he had never seen the inside of a man's chest cavity, while the man was still awake and gasping. "He's crashing!" Silas yelled, watching the portable monitor scream its alarm. "BP is 60/40. We're losing him." "I know," Madeline said. Her voice was devoid of panic. It was the voice of a machine. "Suction. Now." "We don't have a surgeon," Silas shouted, the stress breaking his composure. "Madeline, you can't fix this. We need to stabilize and wait for dust-off." Madeline snapped her head up. Her eyes locked onto his. For a second, Silas saw the abyss. "There is no dust-off, Lieutenant. The birds are grounded. If I don't fix this, he is dead in 3 minutes. Now give me the suction or get the hell out of my OR." Silas froze, then grabbed the suction wand. Suctioning. Scalpel. She didn't wait for him to hand it to her. She snatched it from the tray. With a steady hand, she widened the incision between Jinx's ribs. Blood gushed out, hot and fast. "More light," she commanded. "The power is flickering," Miller yelled from the corner where he was trying to start an IV on Corporal Davis. "Davila, give me your tactical light," Madeline ordered. The private threw his flashlight. Silas caught it and shone the beam directly into the open wound. "I see the bleeder," she whispered. "Intercostal artery. It's retracted behind the rib." She reached in. She wasn't using instruments anymore. She was using her fingers. It was a move of desperation, something forbidden in sterile hospitals, but necessary in the mud and blood of war. She dug her fingers behind the bone, finding the slippery pulsing vessel. "Clamp," she said. Silas handed her the hemostat. She clicked it shut. The fountain of blood stopped instantly. "Suture 30 silk." As she stitched, her hands moved with a blur of motion that Silas couldn't comprehend. He watched her tie knots with one hand, her dexterity defying logic. This wasn't just nursing school. This wasn't just Anatomy 101. This was advanced trauma surgery, performed in the dark under fire. Just as she finished tying off the artery, the tent flap flew open. Major Hendricks, a supply officer from battalion who had been visiting for an inspection when the attack started, stumbled in. He was a man who cared more about inventory spreadsheets than soldiers. He was clutching his shoulder, his face pale. "I'm hit!" Hendricks screamed, staggering toward Madeline's table. "I need a medic. Get away from that grunt and help me." Madeline didn't look up. "Wait your turn, Major. Triage rules." Hendricks grabbed her arm, jarring the needle she was holding. "Do you know who I am? I am a field-grade officer. I have a shrapnel wound. Treat me now." The tent went silent. Even the groaning wounded seemed to pause. Madeline slowly lowered her hands. She turned to Hendricks. The blood on her face made her look like a demon. "Let go of my arm," she said. Soft and low. "I ordered you to." In one fluid motion, Madeline dropped the needle, grabbed Hendricks's wrist, and twisted. There was a sickening pop of cartilage. Hendricks screamed and dropped to his knees. Before he could recover, she kicked his legs out from under him and pinned him to the ground with a boot to his throat. "Silas," she said, calm as a summer breeze. "Check the Major's wound." Silas, wide-eyed, leaned over the whimpering Major. He inspected the shoulder. "It's a graze, Madeline. Shallow. Barely broke the skin." Madeline leaned down her face, inches from Hendricks's. "You disrupted a life-saving procedure for a scratch," she hissed. "If you touch me again, I will sedate you, intubate you, and leave you in the corner until next Tuesday. Do we have an understanding?" Hendricks nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Get him out of here," she told Miller. "Give him a Band-Aid and a lollipop, and get back to work." She turned back to Jinx, who had stabilized. Silas stared at her. "Who are you?" he whispered. Madeline picked up a fresh gauze pad. "I told you, Lieutenant. I'm just the nurse." But the lie was wearing thin, and outside the sound of gunfire was getting closer. The enemy wasn't just mortaring the base anymore. They were at the wire. The night deepened, and with it the situation deteriorated. The FOB was being overrun. The perimeter wall, weakened by the initial blasts, had been breached by a suicide truck bomb 20 minutes ago. Now Taliban fighters were pouring into the compound. Inside the medical tent, the supplies were critical. They were out of morphine. They were down to their last 3 bags of O-negative blood. "We have to conserve," Madeline said, her voice tight. She was washing her hands in a basin of bloody water. "No more fluids for the expectants." Expectants was the polite term for the men who were going to die no matter what they did. It was the hardest decision in medicine, and she made it without blinking. Silas was reloading his M4 carbine by the door. "They're close, Mads. I can hear them near the mess hall." "Keep the door secured," she said. "Nobody comes in unless they're wearing our camo." "Madeline," Silas said, walking over to her. He lowered his voice. "If they breach the tent, we can't defend 18 immobile men. We have to think about an exit strategy." "There is no exit," she said, checking the pulse of a young corporal who had lost both legs. "We hold the line here." With what I have 2 magazines left. Miller has a pistol. You have a stethoscope." Madeline stopped. She looked at the corporal's sleeping face. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. "Open the bottom drawer of the narcotic safe," she said. "What we need, ammo, not drugs. Just do it." Silas walked over to the heavy steel cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it and pulled the drawer open. He gasped. Inside, nestled between boxes of fentanyl, was a Glock 19 with a threaded barrel, 3 extended magazines, and a combat knife with a serrated spine. It wasn't standard issue. It was operator gear. Ghost gear. "Madeline, give it to me." He handed her the weapon. She checked the chamber with a practiced snap, check-press click that only people who slept with guns knew. She tucked the spare mags into the waistband of her scrubs. "How?" Silas asked. "Yemen. 2019. She said, her eyes distant for a second. "I wasn't a nurse then. I was a 18D Special Forces medic attached to a JSOC hunter-killer team. They called me Wraith." Silas felt the room spin. The rumors about female operators were mostly myths, ghost stories. But looking at her now, the stance, the dead eyes, the surgical violence, it all made sense. "Why are you here? Why pushing pills in a forgotten ephod?" "Because I tried to stop," she said softly. "I tried to be normal. I tried to save lives instead of taking them. But it seems war has a way of finding you." Crash. The back of the tent ripped open. It wasn't a door breach. Someone had slashed through the heavy canvas wall with a machete. 3 insurgents spilled into the triage area, AK-47s raised. They were screaming, eyes wild, looking for easy targets. Miller screamed and dropped to the floor. Davila froze. Silas raised his rifle, but he was at the wrong angle. Jinx's bed was in the line of fire. He couldn't shoot. "Down!" Madeline screamed. She didn't seek cover. She advanced. As the lead insurgent raised his rifle to shoot the wounded Jinx, Madeline moved. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like a blur of violence. Pop, pop. 2 rounds from the Glock took the first man in the chest. He dropped before his finger could tighten on the trigger. The second man swung his weapon toward her. She slid across the blood-slicked floor like a baseball player sliding into home, coming up inside his guard. She grabbed the barrel of his AK, diverting it toward the ceiling as he fired a burst that shredded the tent canvas. With her other hand, she drove the combat knife upward under his chin into the brain stem. He went limp instantly. The third man, seeing his comrades fall in under 3 seconds, hesitated. That was his mistake. Silas finally had a shot, but he didn't need to take it. Madeline shoved the dead body of the second man into the third, knocking him off balance. She stepped over the corpse, grabbed the third man by the vest, and threw him onto a surgical trolley. Before he could rise, she put 2 rounds into his head. Silence returned to the tent, broken only by the whimpering of Private Miller. Madeline stood amidst the bodies, her chest heaving slightly. She wiped a splatter of blood from her cheek. She didn't look horrified. She looked activated. She turned to Silas. "Clear the bodies. Check their vests for ammo and grenades. We need everything they have." Silas lowered his rifle. He looked at the woman he had called soft just 3 days ago. He looked at the bodies of the hardened fighters she had dispatched with the ease of someone taking out the trash. "You're not a medic," Silas said, his voice filled with awe and a touch of fear. "You're a reaper." "I'm whatever these men need me to be," she said, holstering the Glock. "Now move, Lieutenant." That was just the scouting party. The main force is coming. The tent was now a fortress. Madeline had organized the walking wounded into a defensive perimeter inside the canvas walls. Even Major Hendricks, humbled and terrified, was holding a pistol by the entrance, shaking like a leaf. But the real enemy was inside the tent. Private Jenkins Jinx was deteriorating again. The surgery had held, but the blood loss was too great. He was going into hypovolemic shock. His skin was translucent. "We need blood," Madeline said, checking his vitals. "He needs whole blood, warm and fresh. The bags are gone. We can't get to the freezer in the main building," Silas said, peering through a tear in the canvas. "The courtyard is a kill zone." Madeline looked around the room. She looked at the soldiers, dirty, exhausted, but alive. "We're going to do a walking blood bank," she announced. "Here," Silas asked. "Now that's against every regulation in the book." The infection risk. Regulation went out the window when the mortar hit the TOC, Madeline snapped. "Who is O positive? Raise your hands." 3 hands went up. One was Miller. One was Sergeant Kowalski, who was conscious but pale. The third was Silas. "Kowalski is out. He's lost too much already," Madeline said. "Miller, you're a match." "Yes, ma'am." "Get on the table next to Jinx. Silas, you're next." She rigged the lines with a terrifying improvisation. She didn't have the proper transfer bags, so she used direct line tubing, gravity-feeding blood from Miller's vein, directly into Jinx's. It was old-school medicine, something from the trenches of WWWI, risky and desperate. "This is going to make you dizzy," she told Miller as she inserted the large bore needle. "Don't pass out on me." "Just save him, Mads," Miller whispered. He didn't call her ma'am anymore. He looked at her with the devotion of a religious zealot. She was their savior. As the blood flowed, the radio on Silas's vest crackled. It had been silent for an hour. "Bravo Actual. This is Viper 1-6. The voice was broken, filled with static. It was the air support. Silas grabbed the mic. "Viper, this is Bravo Actual. We are surrounded. We need immediate CAS. Close air support on the north perimeter. Danger, close. Bravo, negative." The pilot's voice came back, sounding regretful. "Visibility is 0. Dust storm has worsened. We cannot acquire targets. Command has ordered an abort. We are RTB returning to base. You are on your own. Good luck." The radio clicked off. The hope in the room evaporated. The soldiers slumped. Silas dropped the handset, his head in his hands. "That's it," he whispered. "They're leaving us to die." Madeline looked at the radio. Then she looked at the 18 men relying on her. She looked at Jinx, whose color was slowly returning thanks to Miller's blood. "No," she said. She walked over to Silas and took the radio. "Madeline, they're gone," Silas said, defeated. "They can't see us." "They don't need to see us," she said. "They just need to know who is asking." She keyed the mic. She didn't use the standard Army protocol. She switched frequencies to a channel that wasn't supposed to exist on standard comms, a global emergency frequency for Tier 1 assets. "Viper, lead, this is Wraith," she spoke into the darkness. Her voice changed. It wasn't the nurse, and it wasn't even the combat medic. It was something colder. "Authentication code, Omega 9 Zulu Archangel, priority black." Static. Then a sharp hiss. "Wraith." The pilot's voice came back, clear and startled. The static seemed to vanish. "Repeat call sign. That code is listed as MIA, presumed dead." "I am very much alive, Viper, and I have 18 souls on the ground who are not cleared for checkout. Do you copy?" There was a long pause. The authority in her voice carried weight that transcended rank. It was the weight of legends. "Copy, Wraith. the pilot said, his tone shifting from regret to steel. "We didn't know you were down there. Command override confirmed. We are turning around. We're coming in on the deck. Paint the target." "I have no IR strobes," Madeline said. "I have no flares." "Then give us a visual. Give us anything." "We are 2 minutes out." Madeline dropped the mic. "Silas, I need fire." "What?" "I need a signal fire. Big enough to be seen through a dust storm." "We're in a tent. If we light a fire, we burn the wounded." "Not inside." Madeline pointed to the fuel drum sitting near the generator just outside the flap. "There. That's a suicide run," Silas said. "There are snipers on the ridge watching that door." "I know," Madeline said. She grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit, not enough for the pilots to see from miles away, but enough to ignite 40 gallons of diesel fuel. "I'll do it," Silas said, standing up. "I'm the commander." Madeline pushed him back down. "You're the blood donor. You're hooked up to Jinx. You move, he dies." She checked her Glock. 1 magazine left. "Cover me from the flap," she ordered the men. "Shoot at anything that flashes." "Mads, don't," Silas pleaded, straining against the IV line. "You won't make it back." She looked at him. For the first time all night, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was so and beautiful. "I promised you, Silas. Nobody dies in my tent today." She took a breath, kicked open the flap, and sprinted into the hail of bullets. The distance from the medical tent to the fuel supply was exactly 32 yards. In peacetime, on a manicured track, a person could cover that distance in under 5 seconds. But in the middle of a kinetic ambush, with the air saturated by lead and the ground churning under mortar impacts 32 yards, wasn't a distance. It was a death sentence. Madeline Harper stood at the threshold of the torn canvas flap. She took one last breath, inhaling the scents of copper blood, stale sweat, and the burning ozone of the battlefield. She wasn't Madeline anymore. The nurse who catalogued aspirin was gone. Wraith was back, and her heart rate slowed to a predatory rhythm, even as her adrenaline spiked. "Cover fire!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "Now!" She didn't wait for them to comply. She launched herself into the void. Madeline moved with a terrifying grace, her body angled low, her center of gravity hovering just above her knees. She didn't run in a straight line. That was how you got shot. She moved in a jagged, unpredictable zigzag, planting her boots hard into the gravel to change direction every 3 strides. Thwack, thwack, zing. Bullets snapped past her head, angry hornets invisible in the night. The sound of a supersonic round passing inches from your ear is distinctive. A sharp crack that hits the eardrum before the sound of the rifle shot even registers. She heard 3 of them in under a second. The Taliban snipers on the ridge had shifted their focus. They weren't shooting at the tent anymore. Every barrel was trained on the lone figure sprinting through the kill zone. Inside the tent, the scene was one of desperate, frantic violence. Lieutenant Silas Kincaid, still tethered to Private Jinx by the plastic tubing of the blood transfusion, forced himself into a kneeling position. The needle in his arm tugged painfully, threatening to rip the vein if he moved too far. But he didn't care. He braced his M4 carbine against a supply crate, gripping the weapon with his free hand. "Pour it on!" Silas roared, his vision blurring from blood loss. "Do not let them track her fire." Beside him, Miller and the walking wounded unleashed a ragged volley. It wasn't precision shooting. They were hurt, terrified, and firing blindly into the darkness. But the sheer volume of noise and muzzle flash was enough. It forced the snipers on the ridge to duck just for a heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Madeline needed. She hit the dirt, sliding on her hip and thigh like a baseball player stealing home plate. The gravel tore through her scrub pants, shredding the skin of her leg, but she didn't feel it. She slammed into the cover of the generator block just as a heavy caliber round, likely a 12.7mm DSHK, slammed into the steel casing inches above her head. Clang! The impact was deafening. Sparks showered down on her hair. The heavy machine gunner had her dialed in. He began to walk his fire down, chewing up the earth around the generator, pinning her tight against the vibrating metal machinery. She was trapped. The fuel drum was 5 feet away, sitting fully exposed on a wooden pallet. To reach it, she would have to stand up. If she stood up, the heavy gunner would cut her in half before she could raise her arm. Madeline pressed her back against the generator, gasping for air. The dust was thick, clogging her throat. She checked the flare gun in her hand. It was a single-shot plastic launcher. One chance. If she missed, or if the flare bounced off the drum without igniting the fuel, they were dead. The A-10s would turn back, and the enemy would overrun the tent within 10 minutes. "Think, Wraith, think," she hissed through gritted teeth. Her eyes scanned the ground. The heavy machine gun rounds had punched holes in the bottom of the fuel drum moments before she arrived. A dark, viscous liquid was leaking out, creating a growing puddle that trickled down a small slope in the dirt, moving directly toward her position, behind the generator. Diesel fuel. She didn't need to hit the drum. She didn't need to expose herself to the sniper fire. She just needed to light the fuse. The stream of fuel was 3 feet from her boot. Madeline rolled onto her stomach, keeping her head below the top of the generator. The machine gun fire was relentless, a continuous hammer against the metal shield protecting her. She extended her arm around the corner blindly. "Silas," she whispered, "keep their heads down." As if hearing her telepathically, the rate of fire from the medical tent intensified. Silas was emptying his last magazine. Madeline pointed the flare gun at the wet earth 3 feet away. She squeezed the trigger. Pop! Hiss! The magnesium flare shot out a blindingly bright red star in the gloom. It struck the puddle of diesel with a violent sizzle. For a split second, nothing happened. Diesel has a high flash point. It doesn't explode like gasoline. It needs heat. But the magnesium flare burned at over 3,000 degrees. Whoosh! The puddle caught. A line of blue and orange fire raced up the trickle of fuel faster than a snake strike. It traveled up the slope across the pallet and climbed into the bullet holes of the drum. The resulting deflagration was apocalyptic. The vapor inside the drum ignited, expanding with ferocious force. The top of the drum sheared off, sending a pillar of fire 40 feet into the night sky. It was a lighthouse of pure, raging heat, illuminating the entire forward operating base in a stark, flickering orange glow. The shockwave knocked the wind out of Madeline, slamming her head against the dirt. She curled into a ball, shielding her face from the searing heat, coughing as the black smoke rolled over her. 4,000 feet above the valley floor, the world inside the cockpit of Viper 16 changed instantly. The pilot, a major with the call sign Deacon, had been staring at a wall of brown dust on his FLIR forward-looking infrared sensors, unable to distinguish friend from foe. "I can't see them," his wingman radioed. "I'm blind in this soup." Then the sensor screen washed out with a massive thermal bloom. "Contact!" Deacon shouted, his voice tight with relief. "Visual contact. I have a massive thermal spike, grid reference, confirmed. That's our beacon. Copy that Viper, 16. The Joint Terminal Attack Controller, JTAC, back at base, relayed. You are cleared, hot. Danger close. Repeat, danger close. Save those boys. Tally-ho, Deacon whispered. He banked the A-10 Thunderbolt II hard to the left, lining up the nose of the aircraft with the ridge line overlooking the burning signal fire. On the ground, the sound of the enemy gunfire suddenly stopped. The Taliban fighters paused, looking up at the sky, confused by the sudden illumination. Then they heard it. A low whine that rapidly built into a scream. The A-10 Warthog doesn't just shoot, it erases. Brrrr. The sound arrived a split second after the rounds impacted because the bullets traveled faster than the speed of sound. It was a noise like canvas tearing, amplified 1,000 times, a guttural, vibrating roar that rattled the teeth of every man on the ground. The GAU-8 Avenger Gatling gun unleashed 30mm depleted uranium shells at a rate of 65 rounds every second. The ridgeline simply disintegrated. Madeline watched from her position on the ground as the hillside 500 yards away erupted. Boulders the size of cars were shattered into gravel. Trees were mulched. The enemy position, which had been pinning them down for hours, was turned into a smoking crater in under 2 seconds. The Warthog pulled up its engines, screaming as it climbed back into the dust, only to bank around for a second pass. The second pass strafed the breached perimeter wall. The surviving enemy forces didn't retreat. They broke. Panic swept through their ranks. They dropped their AK-47s and RPGs, scrambling over the rocks, desperate to escape the mechanical dragon hunting them from the clouds. Silence returned to the valley heavier than before. The only sound was the crackle of the burning fuel drum and the distant, reassuring drone of the aircraft circling overhead. Madeline lay in the dirt, her chest heaving. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled so violently they collapsed under her weight. The adrenaline dump was hitting her now, a crushing wave of exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. She tapped the earpiece she had stolen from Silas. "Good effect on target, Viper," she rasped, her voice wrecked by smoke. "That was timely." "Any time, Wraith," Deacon's voice came back, sounding respectful and slightly awed. "We'll stay on station until the dust-off birds arrive. You sit tight down there. The cavalry is coming." "Copy." She slowly crawled out from behind the generator. Her white lab coat was black with soot. Her face was streaked with mud and blood. She looked like a creature birthed from the earth itself. Silas came stumbling out of the tent. He was dragging the IV pole, the line still connected to his arm blood, backing up into the tube. He fell to his knees beside her, grabbing her shoulders to see if she was hit. "You're crazy," he yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. He was laughing and crying at the same time, the hysteria of survival taking over. "You are absolutely insane, Mads." "Is Jinx alive?" she asked, grabbing his wrist to check his pulse out of habit. "He's stable. His pressure is holding. You saved him, Mads. You saved all of them." She looked at him, her blue eyes piercing through the grime on her face. The killer was fading, retreating back into the lockbox in her mind. The healer was returning. "Good," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his tactical vest. "Then I can take a break." She closed her eyes, listening to the beat of his heart and the distant thrum of the incoming medevac choppers. She had kept her promise. Nobody died in her tent today. But as the sun began to hint at the horizon, Madeline knew her war was over, and her life as Madeline Harper was gone forever. The ghost had been seen, and ghosts don't get to stay in one place for long. The sun rose over the Kunar Valley, revealing the scars of the night. The phobie was a ruin of twisted metal and scorched earth, but the flag still snapped in the wind above the TOC. At 0700, the unmistakable thumping of rotors filled the valley. Not just one helicopter, but a swarm. 3 Black Hawk medevac birds and 2 heavy-lift Chinooks, carrying a Quick Reaction Force QRF, descended on Iron Horse. The medical teams swarmed the tent. Flight medics, fresh and clean, took over the care of the 18 wounded. They were shocked by what they found. "Who did these sutures?" a flight surgeon asked, inspecting Jinx's chest. "This is textbook vascular repair. Did Sterling do this before he died?" "No," Silas said, sitting on a crate, his arm bandaged where the IV had been. "The nurse did it." The surgeon looked at Madeline, who was sitting quietly in the corner drinking a bottle of water. She had washed the blood off her face, put her hair back in a messy bun, and put her white lab coat back on over her dirty scrubs. She looked small, unassuming. "The nurse?" the surgeon scoffed. "Right." But the drama wasn't over. As the wounded were being loaded, a different helicopter landed a sleek Black Hawk with no markings. A man stepped out, flanked by 2 armed guards. He wore multicam fatigues, but his collar bore the stars of a major general. It was General Stone, the commander of JSOC operations in the sector. He marched straight toward the medical tent. Major Hendricks, the supply officer, who had tried to bully Madeline the night before, saw the general and straightened up. He saw an opportunity. He smoothed his uniform, puffed out his chest, and stepped into the general's path. "General," Hendricks barked, throwing a salute. "Major Hendricks Battalion Supply. It was a hell of a night, sir. I took command after the TOC was hit. I organized the defense of the medical tent. We held them off." The general stopped. He looked at Hendricks. Then he looked at the cowering soldiers behind him. "You organized the defense?" General Stone asked, his voice like grinding gravel. "Yes, sir," Hendricks lied smoothly. "It was chaos. I had to maintain order. In fact, I need to file a report about a civilian staff member, the nurse Harper. She was insubordinate, stole narcotics, and recklessly endangered the position by lighting a fire during a blackout order. I recommend she be removed from theater immediately." Silas, listening from the stretcher nearby, tried to stand up to protest, but he was too weak. Rage boiled in his veins. General Stone didn't look at Silas. He looked at Hendricks. A cold, predatory smile touched the general's lips. "Is that so, Major? She endangered the position?" "Yes, General. She's a liability." "Step aside, Major." Stone walked past Hendricks as if he didn't exist. He walked straight to the back of the tent where Madeline was packing her bag. She didn't look up. "Captain Maddox," the general said softly. The entire tent went silent. Hendricks's jaw dropped. Madeline zipped her bag. She turned around. She didn't salute. She just nodded. "General Stone, you look old, and you look like a hell wraith," Stone replied, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "We thought you were dead. Yemen went dark. We scrubbed the files." "I liked being dead," she said. "It was peaceful, until yesterday." "I heard the radio traffic," Stone said. "That authentication code, it woke up half the Pentagon. You know I can't let you stay here now. Your cover is blown. The Taliban knows who was on that radio. You're a high-value target again." "I know." She sighed. She looked around the tent at the soldiers she had saved. Jinx was being carried out, giving her a thumbs up. Miller was crying, mouthing the word, "Thank you." "I'm ready to go," she said. General Stone turned back to the room. He looked at Major Hendricks, who was now trembling, his face the color of ash. "Major Hendricks," Stone barked. Yes, sir." "You said this woman was a liability. You said you organized the defense." I may have misspoken, sir. Captain Maddox is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star," Stone announced, his voice booming so every soldier could hear. "She was a Tier 1 operator before you even learned how to lace your boots. She single-handedly saved 18 men while you were hiding in the corner." Stone walked up to Hendricks and ripped the Velcro rank patch off the Major's chest. "You are relieved of command, Mr. Hendricks. You will be on the next bird, out under arrest for cowardice and falsifying a report. Get out of my sight." MPs grabbed the sobbing Hendricks and dragged him away. It was the hardest, coldest karma anyone had ever seen. The soldiers on the stretchers cheered. General Stone turned back to Madeline. He snapped a crisp, slow salute. "The bird is waiting, Wraith. Time to go home." Madeline picked up her bag. She walked past Silas. She stopped for a second and pressed something into his hand. It was the name tag from her scrubs. "Madeline Harper, RN. Take care of them, Lieutenant," she said. "I will," Silas choked out. "Thank you. For everything." She walked out into the sunlight, the dust swirling around her. She boarded the black helicopter, and as it lifted off, banking hard toward the mountains, Silas knew he would never see her again. The official report would say that a special operations team repelled the attack. Madeline Harper would officially cease to exist. The army would send a new nurse, a regular one, who followed the rules and got scared of blood. But the 18 men of Bravo Company would never forget. They would tell the story in bars and VFW halls for 50 years. The story of the quiet librarian nurse who walked through fire-stitched arteries in the dark and called down the thunder from the sky. They would remember the ghost who saved them. And that is the incredible story of Madeline Harper, the quiet nurse, who turned out to be the deadliest person in the valley. It's a powerful reminder that true heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scrubs and comfortable shoes, and they are just waiting for the right moment to show the world who they really are. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? The quiet person at your job or the shy neighbor next door, what kind of history are they hiding? Would you want them in your foxhole when the world falls apart? If this story got your heart racing, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about hidden heroes and karmic justice, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.